Don't I? You see, well, I had a dilemma because I felt God putting this passage on my heart, but I thought, but you have heard so many sermons on this that I bet most of you could do one. And you know what I'm like, so because my next challenge would be that if you could do that, you ought to be doing it. I'll help you, but you can do it. But a few years ago, I got an opportunity, God-given opportunity. I won't take the time by telling you all about this, but I got to do some study on this passage through someone else. God set something up. And I saw things that I'd never seen before, and it sits with me. And when I prayed through what to share and started to feel God was leading me to this, I got out the studies aids and the notes we'd made and the things we'd worked through, and discovered that I had 6 pages. A4 size pages of the condensed notes. So you'll be really pleased to know I'm not trying to do it all today, but I realised again afresh what that study, how it had impacted me. Because you see, in our days of mum and dad bank and children, it's going to swing back, isn't it? They're saying that they're going to be even longer getting on the property ladder. They're going to be home for years. We don't necessarily see, we underestimate the request that the younger son makes. There was a guy called Kenneth Bailey, and I don't know a lot about him other than for 15 years he travelled around places like Morocco and India and Turkey and Sudan, and he always asked the question, what if your son came to you and demanded his inheritance? And he said in 15 years the answer was always either that's impossible, it can't happen. He got the answer that they would have beaten their son, it was that bad. Because what the younger son is really saying is, I want you to die, Dad. That's how bad it is. It is so unheard of that he's actually wishing his dad dead. It's culturally disrespectful. Nobody would have come across a request like that before. And we sort of think it's quite bad. It's not quite the done thing, but I don't think we always realise actually how bad it was. You see, there was no wills until the time of Herod. Things were set. The elder son always inherited twice as much, but then he became the head of the family. And Dad would hand over the reins and his belongings in the hours before his death. There was a precedent that it could be handed over earlier, and in Kings, David does that. Through ill health, he hands over earlier, before he dies, he hands over to his son. But if that happened, there was an expectation that Dad would then be provided for. He would expect to be cared for, to be fed, to be clothed, to be provided for. So these family units, there was like a hierarchy. And although this is the younger son, he still was quite high up there and would have had responsibilities. He would have had responsibilities to help provide for his dad because he had inherited his share. He wasn't ever expected culturally to take that money away out of the family. because there would be aunts and uncles, an extended family under that umbrella. And so they were provided for. Jobs were part of that. Your food, your home, your clothing, it was all provided for in that umbrella, in that system. And if Dad hadn't handed over earlier and was still alive, then the sons should have been caring for him and looking after him and providing for his needs. We know that our young man is probably under 20, because if he had been, although we know that they had their bar mitzvahs at 12, 13, actually they weren't really counted as adults till they were 20. And there's verses in the Old Testament that show us that, because when they counted up the fighting men and various things, they didn't count anybody under 20. So our young man is probably under 20, and because he's not married. But he doesn't just wish Dad dead, he's also not taking up his responsibilities. Because, as I said, his inheritance would have stayed as part of that hierarchy, providing for lots of people. And he's not going to take his share of the responsibilities. It's just as much a shock that he's going to take his money away as the fact that he's asked for it. In a sense, he's robbing himself of his own future provision, because if he stays in the system, which is how they all lived those days, if he'd stayed in the system, there would be space in that for him to have a wife and a family, and he would have a home, and his family would be provided for, all within that system. But he's robbing himself, in a sense, because he's going to take it away and squander it without any thought of his own future provision. And we know the end of the story, so we know that that's going to happen. We know he's going to get so hungry that there's nothing to eat. So he's robbed himself. I mean, we never do things like that, do we? We never do something that in the long run isn't the best for ourselves. We don't make mistakes like that. So he walks away from a place of safety and security and provision to enjoy, it says, wild living. Isn't it? It's interesting that it tells us that he went wild living, but actually when you get to the end of the story, the older brother seems to know what some of that wild living has been involving. And it makes you wonder whether Dad was and family were able to keep tabs on him and get snippets of news, but we don't know. But the thing is, the further he moves away from home, the more he deteriorates. Presumably, he moves away from home and then enjoys squandering all that money and doing all the wild living that he's doing. But then, whether it's geographically or mentally or spiritually, he moves further away and he deteriorates. And for the first time, we guess, in his life, he reaches a place where he's in need. He gets a job feeding pigs, so we know that he's working for a Gentile, and we know that he's not actually doing that great a job. It's not the most, it would be on the top of your list. In actual fact, if you were a Jew, you are now ceremonially unclean. You're ceremonially unclean. That would have been a big thing. And he's going to be dirty and unkempt because he's working with pigs and he has no money. And he's so hungry that the pig food looks good. And that's really hungry, isn't it? I doubt that we could imagine being, or have ever been in that position, to be that hungry. But the thing is, some of the commentaries say that he probably couldn't have physically eaten the pig food anyway. It maybe wasn't suitable for human. But he makes this little comment. He says, no one gave him anything. So no one, he said, maybe the people who own the pigs are providing enough pig food for the pigs, and he thinks that it'll get noticed if he took some, but no one gave him anything. I think that's a really sad little phrase. Because this guy is now totally alone. No one cares. And yet he had that place, didn't he, of safety, of security. He had provision. He had a dad who we can tell from the story loved him. But he left it all, and now no one cares. He will be completely alone. He has no self-worth anymore. He wouldn't have any self-worth to be, as a Jew, to take a job feeding pigs. So there's no self-worth anymore. What would be the next step? The next step of deterioration if he goes further down? And some of the commentaries suggest it would be death. He would have died. We don't know. It's interesting because Robin has another book, and the guy points out that in lots of the parables, in fact, I think he said there was only one where we find out what happened afterwards. But he was pointing out in how many parables we don't know what happened. So we don't know what would have happened if he hadn't have come to his senses. And in fact, at the very end, we don't know how much he was restored back to the life that he'd had. We don't know. Might come back to that. So when he gets to the point that he recognises what he's lost, it's actually a realisation of who he is. Because he's a son. He was a son, living with all the benefits of being, of sonship. And he's come away and he's done his own thing and he's done the unthinkable to his family, and he's used all this money up, but actually he's still a son. He's just now a son living with the pigs. It's not great, not a great place to be in, but at least he realises who he is. I don't think we always realise who we are, because we might not get in the position that he's in, but we do struggle times with our self-worth. We do struggle sometimes with our behaviours. We can do things that are not in our best interest. We can walk away from safe places, secure places. We can walk away from God. We can walk away from God in a dozen different ways. We can do the whole thing like the prodigal son. Or we can just walk away in one area of our life. Keep on doing something that we know that he said we shouldn't, or stop reading our Bible or not praying. We can walk away in so many ways. And sometimes it's because we don't realise who we are. Because if you have given your life to Jesus, then you're actually now not just a son or a daughter, you're a child of a king. You're forgiven. You're accepted. It's not anymore about what you can do or how good you are, what self-worth you can rustle up. It's about who you are. You're his. And if you haven't yet done that, and you haven't yet made a commitment to him in that way, then that's just all waiting for you. That's who you're going to be when that time comes. So I don't see it that he recognises, oh, what a terrible position I'm in. I'm so hungry. He actually realises who he is, a son. He says, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. Well, he's quite willing, isn't he, to take, the hired servant status. Bit of a paradox there. He's realised who he is, and yet he's willing to take it, a lower place. But he's going home to his father. And have you ever thought about that? On the way home, he rehearses what he's going to say. He's practicing it. He's going to say, going back to my father, I'll say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. He rehearses what he needs to say. Now, why would you rehearse something? If you think about, if I think about myself, I would rehearse something if I was scared. I would rehearse it if I lacked confidence. And he could be scared. He does have reasons to be scared, which I'll tell you in a minute. And he maybe has reasons to lack confidence in going back because, what he did was so terrible, is Dad going to accept him back? Or maybe he doesn't understand grace. And sometimes we don't understand grace. You know that God will forgive if you repent. How many times do we struggle to then to leave it with God? We want to sort of go over it again. We want to beating ourselves up is quite good fun, isn't it? That's quite a fun thing to do now again. We don't always understand grace. That grace is God accepting us and forgiving us. And yet, most of us haven't done anything as awful as this. But we can still struggle to accept the grace of God and to understand it. So maybe he doesn't understand grace, that when he gets there and repents, Dad will forgive him. Because the grace of God means that with us, he can turn around anything, any big mess that we've made, any sins that we've committed. He can forgive us and turn them around. And you often find people, don't you, who are able to use their stories to help other people or to in ministry. But of course, they've had to get to the point of recognising the sin in their lives and asking for forgiveness and receiving grace before that happens. And it's not reliant on our own self-worth and our own self-esteem. It's reliant on God seeing us as sons and daughters, his children. But Dad was looking out. It says, doesn't it? While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. While he was a long way off, he's looking out for him. Do you know, Dad shouldn't have run. Culturally, it was considered undignified. He shouldn't have run. That was another taboo. But Dad was so desperate to get there first. And the reason he was so desperate to get there first was because if the community got there first, they would have shunned and humiliated the son. Actually, he wouldn't have come back. There was a custom. If you had done something awful enough, that the women would come out and bring a pot with them, whatever, a cup, a casserole dish, whatever they were willing to bring out, and they would have smashed them at his feet, and he would not have been allowed to return. That's how bad it was. So Dad had to get there before the community, so that Dad showed grace to say, I want him back. I accept him back. That's the only way he could have come back to that village. And Dad was running to save him from being shamed, humiliated, and from being run off. Unconditional love. Because once Dad had embraced him and shown that unconditional love, the community would have had to let him back. That's why Dad was watching out. And every time we wander off from God, whether we've never been to him or whether we have, and I always think it's like little bits of you escape, don't they? Go off to do your own thing. But every time that happens, God is looking out to run to you, to run to me with the embrace of unconditional love, to bring that bit back. Every person that's never met him, God's looking out to limit the shame, the humiliation, to bring them back. Unconditional love. What we don't know is the rest of the story. We don't know how the community went on to respond to him. Sometimes the forgiveness from other people is the hard bit, isn't it? Sometimes that's something we need to examine in ourselves. If someone else has made a mistake, if they've repented with God, and that's between them and God, and that's sorted out, that's their business. But have we forgiven them? Do we let it go? Is there something you remember from years ago when so-and-so did that? Because if there is, you need to let it go. Because they probably sorted it out with God years back. You're still holding on to it. Did the community forgive him and embrace him? We don't know. Is that something that we need to examine ourselves on? And did he forgive himself? Or did he spend years beating himself up? We don't know. We don't know that either, but actually beating ourselves up isn't actually very profitable. We don't get over things, we don't get forgiveness, we don't move on. So if you've got that tendency to think, oh, I did so and so wrong, and you go over it, and you think how awful you are, and things like that, you need to bring that to God, because it's not profitable. Henry Nouwen says, every time I take a gift, health, my skills, my talents, every time I take something and use it in a way that doesn't glorify God, that is the equivalent of going into that distant country. That's quite strong, actually, isn't it? That he equates that to the story of the prodigal son, and that every time we go off and do with something, a talent, a skill, and we don't glorify God, we do something else with it, we're doing the same. We're going into that distant country. Lots of things to think about. Lots of things to just let God show you and me, to show each one of us where we fit in the story. Don't have time to look at the other characters, but if there's something that fits for you today, if in some way you need to come back into that unconditional love, if you need to realise that you're a son, you're a daughter, not just of Dad who is so in love with you, he's looking out from a distance, but with someone who is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. If you need to respond to that today, then please do. Because as that father longed and longed for that son, so is God longing for each one of us today.